thank you, thank you everybody for joining us. I am Jacob Schwemlein, the director for Drive Electric Ohio, and we're thrilled to have you and a wonderful group of panelists here for a conversation about community charging, what EV deployment means for communities, how communities can start preparing for greater EV deployment, and some of the tools, resources, and opportunities that I guess we can all benefit from as part of this transition. So with me, I have Cassandra Clevinger from PCFO. Cassandra, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Cassandra Clevinger. I'm with Power Clean Future Ohio. I'm the deputy director there, and Power Clean Future Ohio works with local municipalities throughout the state of Ohio to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And part of how we do that's through fleet electrification and EV infrastructure.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. And we do have a fourth panelist, but he appears to have been dropped from the call. He will, I'm sure, join us again soon. Next panelist up is Josh Cohen with SWTCH. Josh, would you like to introduce yourself, and I'll share your slides.
Great. Thanks, Jacob. And hello, everyone. As Jacob said, my name is Josh Cohen. I lead policy for SWTCH, which is an electric vehicle charging provider with a focus on multi-tenant properties, in particular multifamily buildings like apartments and condominium buildings. And so as Jacob is pulling up the slides, I will start briefly with the origin story for SWTCH. It started about 7.5 years ago when a guy named Carter Lee was living in a condominium building and was thinking of getting an EV. And so at the time, he approached the association, asked if they could help with any of the infrastructure, the charging, anything like that. The association said no, so he kept looking for an EV, figured out what he wanted, and then he went back to the association and said, okay, I'm going to get an EV. I do need to charge it, so I will take care of paying for everything, installing everything, and just take care of it all myself. And the association still said no. And so he said, this is not right. He quit his job. He started a company. And 7.5 years later, SWTCH is now one of the leading charging companies, particularly for multi-tenant properties. We manage around 8,000 ports across North America. And so, all right, so if you can go to the next slide, Jacob. All right. I'm having trouble seeing the slides myself, but
it sounds like the attendees can.
Okay, good. So if you can scroll, now I need to see what slide I'm on. All right, so the third slide should say best practices for multi-unit EV charging. So if you can move ahead to that and just pause there. So just for this intro, this slide has 4 best practices or considerations to think about when thinking about installing chargers, particularly in the multi-tenant or multi-user context. This could be a residential apartment building, it could be a municipal government building, it could be a public park, a parking garage, any type of use case where you have multiple vehicles charging on chargers. And so the 4 kind of high-level considerations are, number 1, to invest in software to manage the charging. Software can unlock a whole host of benefits. It can also save money if you take advantage of the internal metering within the chargers. You can avoid the need to install separate external utility meters and save money that way. Software can help manage the energy that the vehicles use, which can unlock huge savings over time. And software, particularly for a multiple driver context, can enable the owner of the charging station to set access, to set pricing about who can charge, who can't, how much different user groups pay, and that sort of thing. Second key consideration is around interoperability. One of the lessons learned, I would say, that the EV charging experience has shown so far over the past decade or so is that interoperability is a key principle to avoid stranded assets. Some software network providers require that the physical charger can only operate on that software network platform. So Switch and other charging companies have had numerous customers, numerous jobs where the customers have hardware that is otherwise perfectly functional, but because they want to switch software providers or they're having an issue with the software provider, they can't. And so in effect, they have to rip and replace the unit. And so again, software and interoperability can help avoid stranded assets. Two other key considerations are the importance of ongoing operations and maintenance. And again, experience over the past decade or so has shown that providing charging access is not just about deployment and installation. It's about what happens after those chargers are in the ground and how do you continue to maintain them. Sometimes there's driver error, sometimes things go wrong. Making sure you have a plan and a budget up front so that there's quick response and you can maintain uptime is really important. And then finally, and I think some other panelists may touch on this more during this session, as you're thinking about how you're going to pay for the chargers and you're looking at various incentives, there are a number of federal and state and other requirements for eligibility. For example, Buy America is a pretty basic requirement for some of the federal funding coming out. So if you think ahead, if you lean on industry partners who can help you access these incentives, you can help save money that way. So Jacob, I will pause there and I will look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. And I know we had a little bit of sharing issues with the first couple slides, but if anybody would like a copy of those, ask Josh. I'm sure he would be happy to share them. Next panelist up is Emily Pape with the Electrification Coalition.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Emily Pape. I'm a senior associate with the Electrification Coalition, and we're a nationwide nonprofit that is working to end oil dependence by electrifying transportation. And so we have a variety of efforts across the country. We work in both state and federal level policy, as well as port electrification and other kind of implementation programs at the local level, oftentimes working with federal implementation of programs and that sort of thing. But our team works really closely with public and private entities to advance transportation electrification from light to medium to heavy duty vehicles. And a large part of that really revolves around EV charging deployment, especially with those recent federal investments with Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And so we're really seeing a lot of money and interest coming into charging. And so we've been working a lot in that. And so we work with communities in Ohio and in other states, but we've done quite a bit of work in Ohio, specifically on the technical support side. So one component of that would be in projecting EV demand, mapping charging placement. And so we really see this as thinking comprehensively on what cohesive charging planning looks like, including Justice 40 initiative efforts, and really looking at charging planning from a community and regional standpoint to make sure that we're really getting chargers in the ground where they really need to be. And so like I said, we've worked quite a bit in Ohio, continue to do so, work pretty closely with our friends at PCFO. And so I'm really looking forward to the rest of the conversation today.
Thanks, Emily. And last but definitely not least, Rap Hankins.
Hi, I'm Rap Hankins. I'm the president of Drive Electric Dayton. We are an affiliate of Drive Electric Ohio and the Electric Vehicle Association. Unlike the other panelists, we're sort of unique. We are individuals who actually own electric vehicles in the greater Dayton area, and we're EV enthusiasts. 8 years ago, we got started because we felt as people that owned electric vehicles, if we were going to be electric vehicle advocates it was important that we took our cars out that we owned and we shared them with other individuals. So since December of last year, we've done 80 events and basically reached out to over 40,000 citizens in the Miami Valley. And we've learned over the last 8 years that you can't do little events. You have to do exciting and huge events. So we've done things like EV Out to the Ball Game, where we showed 60 EVs in front of 9,000 baseball fans. And just recently, we did an event called EV Under the Stars, where we went out with people who had telescopes and electric vehicles and showed how our two groups merged together. Our basic principles are EVs for all and burn nothing. We really believe that if electric vehicles are going to be useful to all folks, we have to be in all communities. That's Hispanic communities, African American communities, working class communities. And we believe that vehicles should be affordable, which they are not today, reliable, and accessible to all. So it's very important that you have groups like Drive Electric Dayton that are reaching out and putting their emphasis on education when it comes to citizens first, elected officials when it comes second, and third when it comes to the dealer. And then we really believe, like many of our panelists, that we have to implement policy that guarantees charging for all. Because if we don't guarantee charging for people who live in homes and apartments and charging at work, then we're going to have the redlining that we've seen as African Americans affecting EV owners who are poor individuals and underserved individuals who want to own electric vehicles. We try to be non-political, but we have to be very honest with you. We found today that owning an electric vehicle in the United States is a very political act, unfortunately. So education in all its various forms are critically important. So we're excited to be here, and I'm excited to participate on this panel and answer questions as we move forward.
Thank you, Rap, and thank you all of our panelists. And before we get into our discussion questions, there will be a Q&A period towards the end of this conversation. So if you have any questions that you would like us to address, feel free to drop them in chat at any point. So I guess to get us started, big picture, what is community charging? And I guess what does it mean to be an EV-ready community?
You want me to start?
Sure. Rap, would you like to kick us off?
Since we're community, we believe that community charging has to be equitable charging for all citizens. We know as EV drivers that 82% of all people who own EVs, they charge at home. But if you are a person that lives in an apartment complex, many times you have to go out and actually pay for charging, which can actually make your cost of charging double the cost of a person who lives in, owns their own home. And a community charging is where charging, particularly level 2 charging, is at libraries, at parks, and at interesting places throughout your community. And the people who have to lead that issue are local elected officials, and advocates like Drive Electric Dayton really make the point that if you have community charging, where you have charging everywhere, is economic development. Because people, if they look on all the various apps that are out there, and clearly there's too many of them at this time, we have to make it more simple. But when you look on your phone and you look where a community has a charger, you're more apt to visit there, stop, park your car, charge, buy something, have lunch. So a community that really wants to be EV friendly should have chargers literally everywhere, which are good for your citizens and also good for those who visit your community.
And I would just add, just hit the nail on the head there on the community charging side. But broadly, an EV ready community is really just making sure you are implementing, for what you see today, the amount of EVs and EV drivers you see today, but also ensuring you're planning for growth and for the change that's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And so it's ready for what's happening today, but also with that long view to make sure you don't end up having more work later down the road.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I think that's a great way to start off the conversation. So if your community hasn't already, how or should and how can your community set an EV goal? And kind of, would you like to hit on some of those benchmarks and the priorities for future planning that you had mentioned? Emily, it sounded like you were starting to get there, so I'll let you start this one off.
Well, community goals, like any goals, can be really powerful drivers, and just let people really know that you're prioritizing this, that it's something you're working towards as a full community, and really just as a baseline, always understanding where you're at today. So like I'm saying, you want to set something that's realistic, that makes sense for your community. What makes sense in one community doesn't necessarily align, perfectly with what makes sense for another community. And that really can help drive your progress forward and make sure you have the planning then in place to support that goal as you go.
And the other issue is if we understand that with the next level of federal dollars from Washington, we've got the Census 40 program, which says that what a community should do is Justice 40, which means a community should go out and speak to its citizens. When you're actually the elected officials or planning and zoning is talking to citizens, you should explain to them the benefits of having chargers in the community, asking them where they want them. Because one thing that we know as drivers is EVs aren't purchased when people don't see chargers. Communities have to see that chargers are in place first. And when chargers are in place first, then people go, well, gee, there's a charger on Main Street in front of the library, or there's a charger in front of the place that I really like to eat. And then they go, then maybe I can go out and buy myself, a brand new electric vehicle. And if you know that you can charge when you're going around the great state of Ohio, you're more apt to buy an electric vehicle. And I really think it starts with the planning and zoning department in each community, where they look at their existing policies, because we found that it's cheaper to put charging in when you're building a new home, when you're building a new parking lot, or when you're retrofitting an apartment complex, like my friend with the charging stations. He will tell you it's a lot easier and a lot cheaper to put things in new construction than it is to retrofit. So planning and zoning is really a key aspect at home rule cities in Ohio.
I can jump in on this one a little bit too. Goal setting can be really challenging for local governments because you set a goal and you have to be held accountable to that goal, right? You have elections and taxpayers and all of those different pieces, but it's also a really powerful tool because it really gives you a chance to go to the community, to go to those taxpayers, to go to the folks that could benefit from this infrastructure and to see where their needs are, to see where their vision for their community is, and to take a second and look at the data and do some data analysis, looking at your fleet internally. If folks are seeing you as a local government, I'm coming from the local government perspective, working with Power Clean Future Ohio. If you are working with, if you have EVs in your fleet and they see them charging and your community and your citizens see it, they can start visioning it in their own lives, and you can really take a step forward in this. So learning a little bit about your community, where your government is, and taking a step back in that goal setting process can help you really evaluate the ways you want to move forward, which will then help you with funding and getting community engagement support and all the other pieces you need to move forward. It really gives you a chance to do that stakeholder engagement piece too, beyond just your local folks. And who are your local utilities? How are you getting power in your community? How are these different pieces coming together, and what are the intersections of this with other issues in your community, like active transportation and complete streets? And how can you leverage that momentum and excitement in setting your goal and compounding the impact of your efforts? So I think it's really, really important for communities to set a goal, even if it feels a little uncomfortable getting through that process.
Awesome. So where would you recommend communities get started? Sorry, Cassandra, this was for you. Where would you recommend communities get started? Since I know
Oh,
you and PCFO have had a lot of
yeah,
experience working with communities through that process.
definitely. And I was thinking about Josh's presentation a little bit too on this question, and thinking about some of the considerations you can make. But just getting the conversation started. I'll talk a little bit more about how cities can really put rubber to the road, so to speak, and build out those roadmaps for EV charging through some programs that we have available. But just getting folks at the table and starting the conversation in your community to see where your gaps are, where your opportunities are, where your challenges are, and thinking about how you can build processes to move forward through those, and how you could overcome those obstacles with that larger engagement piece. It's really just getting at the planning table.
All right. And last question for you before I move on to the next one. You mentioned utility engagement. When would you say is the best time to bring the utilities in on the planning and the goal setting process?
At the very beginning, they will know if you can get power to the location that you want it. You can do all the location planning you want, but until you really know what type of grid infrastructure you're working with at those locations, you won't be able to make certain choices. You won't be able to be certain in the locations you're picking. You really should start that utility engagement as soon as possible. There's also programs available through certain utilities. It gets very complicated depending on what region of the state you're in, but there could be some opportunities as well as you're working with your local utility to get this infrastructure in place.
Great. Well, so moving on to the next question. We'll start with wrap for this one. Most experts predict that the majority of EV charging will be done at home. How do you see community charging and workplace charging fitting into the bigger transportation picture?
As I said earlier, I think I totally agree with that. As I said earlier, 82% of people actually charge at home. And I was, as you know, I just returned from Washington, D.C., and so I got a chance to charge on other networks when I went at home. So you're dealing with all those various issues that happens when you're on the road. One of the coolest things when you're at home is you have 250 miles or 300 miles of range where you can travel literally anywhere in Ohio when you start at home, which makes it very cool. So if you have charging at home and charging at the place where you work at, think about what that means. That literally means that you never have to visit a gas station again, right? And if your employer is willing to offer either discount charging or free charging, that means that you basically can drive relatively for free, which really makes owning an EV really equitable for anyone who owns one. But I think the important thing to remember is that in underserved communities, less than 50% of people own their own homes. So we often forget that if I'm going to buy myself a Chevy Volt with a V, I've got not only do I have to worry about charging in my apartment, but if there's no place that I can charge in my area, and I have to go to either a Tesla charger, if that's possible with the North American Charging Standard, or Electrify America, or somewhere else, I'm actually looking at paying double the cost of someone that is charging at home. So it's important, if possible. There's actually a law in Columbus called the right to charge, which means that everybody that owns an EV should have the right to talk to their apartment owners, talk to the company at work, and help them have the means to charge. So, but it is true that 82% of the people that own EVs do charge at home, and it's very important to do that if and when you can.
Awesome. And Josh, I know Switch does a lot of work. It has a lot of focus on this particular section of the transportation, economy. Is there anything you would like to add to that?
Sure. And just to kind of piggyback on some of the other points that other panelists have made. So a majority of all charging does occur at home. Roughly 80%, give or take, but a vast majority occurs at home. And so to Rap's point, if you don't have a charger available at home, then you have to look for other places to charge. So that could be at the workplace, it could be public fast charging, but there are a lot of advantages to being able to charge at home, not just the convenience, but the affordability. So one of the challenges associated with residential charging for folks who don't live in their own single family home is that when you get to condominium buildings or apartment buildings, there's additional layers and challenges that can really hinder deployment of charging stations. As Switch's founder, Carter Lee, experienced, even when he lives in a condo and owns his own unit, there are other considerations that can be challenging. The right to charge law that Rap mentioned, that some cities have adopted and some states have adopted, is a really important policy tool, which, as Rap mentioned, says that unless and the wording differs from one jurisdiction to another, but in essence, it says unless there's a compelling reason not to, that it would significantly disadvantage other unit owners or be exorbitantly expensive or some reasons like that, that a multifamily property cannot reasonably deny a unit owner from installing a charging station. So that's like one policy step that's an important measure to help overcome that obstacle. Not to keep emphasizing Rap's comments, but he also mentioned how it's way cheaper to install some of the initial charging infrastructure at the time of construction for new construction than it is to take an existing building and go back in after the fact. And even if you have the capacity, which is a question, then install the conduit and the wiring. It can be 4 times as expensive, if not more. And so another policy lever to help enable and make it more affordable for folks who live in multifamily properties to charge is an EV-ready building code requirement. And again, similar to the right to charge law, the actual wording of it, the requirements, the percentages of parking spaces can vary from one jurisdiction to another. But it's a broader conversation because it involves the International Code Council usually, and then states or local cities can adopt elements of these building codes. But just at a high level, establishing an EV-ready parking requirement is another key tool for folks, many of whom are probably on this webinar, who care about providing community charging and are wondering what are some things that my community can do. And just to put some numbers to this, just in Ohio, if you look at the number of apartment units, just in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus, there are over 500,000 apartment units in those 3 cities. And then you add Dayton and Akron, that's another 100,000. So huge number of folks are impacted or are part of this important sector.
Great. Well, thank you both for sharing on that one. So you've actually led us wonderfully into the next section, which was just at a very high level. What are some of these local policies and best practices that you all would recommend that communities should be considering as part of EV, forward-looking EV preparedness? So we've mentioned building requirements. Josh, I know you had mentioned the EV parking, like charging in parking lots thing. I'll plug, my home city of Cincinnati for a second here. We have something like that in newly built parking garages. I think it's 20% of parking spots have to have the wiring to support a future charger deployment. And kind of went a creative way with another incentive, which was if you have an EV in Cincinnati, you get free street parking anywhere in the city. Are there any particular policies that you would like to?
One of the other policies I'd like to see cities adopt, I don't know if Switch would be excited about this, but I think it's really important that when you're charging for level 2 charging, that the first hour be free, and that you limit people to how long they can actually sit at a charger. because I've learned in small cities, one of the biggest complaints that municipalities have is that you have the same people using the charger every day, and they will sit there and use it as a work charger, and not share it for other visitors who are coming into a community. So it's really important that you have two levels of chargers in your community, that you really emphasize workplace chargers for people who are working, and then charges for visitors who are traveling through your community, for that you have that economic development piece. So I think it's very important that you just don't have one or two chargers and say, well, people aren't ready for it. You have to look at what the long-term development will be in the industry. So I think the policy of how long we let people charge, where we charge, and how we work with our business leaders is very, very important in policy.
Another policy that's a little more concentrated or local, but we were talking about municipal fleets earlier and kind of having cities or counties really serve as leaders and show, how an EV works by adopting them in their fleet. And so one way to really emphasize this from, like I said, city, county level would be to have an EV first procurement policy. And so that would look like when you are looking to retire vehicles in your fleets, have that your policy is you look to EVs first. And unless there's a very compelling reason, like the mileage just doesn't work out, or there's a very specific use case, the EV is prioritized over a conventional vehicle. And so that is one way to just get more EVs on the streets, charging in front of folks, and really showing the possibilities with EVs from a city or county leadership standpoint.
All right, Cassandra, Josh, is there anything you two would like to add to that one?
I think I anticipated the question when I mentioned the two big ones, the right to charge and the EV-ready parking requirements. And again, depending on the use case, like Rat mentioned, an anti-idling or other types of laws that can help ensure that these chargers are available when they're needed.
All right. And then last question before we move on to the next section. So how can community engagement inform better, smarter EV planning? And kind of why is engaging with your community such an important part of preparing for this, this transition? Emily, I think you breached the topic a little bit earlier. Would you like to start us off?
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest thing is just you want to bring the chargers to the people, not have to do the other way around. Because switching to an electric vehicle over an internal combustion vehicle already necessitates some amount of behavioral shift. And you want to make it as easy as possible for folks to then fuel up, charge up, whatever language you want to use, and make sure that they're actually able to use those vehicles. And so really making sure you're listening to your constituents, they tell you what they need, and it'll make a better use case across the board because of that.
All right, Cassandra.
Does Rap want to go next? I saw you come off mute, Rap. Did you want to jump in on this one, and I can?
I was thinking about a story in Trotwood, Ohio, where when the county built the brand new courts building, we had a retired teacher that owned the Chevy Vault, and she did not have charging at home. And she told me that she was able to drive across the street and charge for free because the county did not charge her for anyone for charging. And she told me that she was saving hundreds of dollars a year. And that let her buy food as a senior and literally take care of herself. So many times we don't understand the money that folks in underserved communities can save. And what does it mean for families when, in these difficult times of inflation, where EVs are cheaper and you don't pay the level of maintenance and other issues that happen with ICE vehicles, when we have charging available that serves the interests of people as they're growing along in this market, that we can really make their life better and help our citizens survive in a much more equitable way. And people say, but we can't afford free charging all the time. But the issue is that once we start free charging and we build the market up, then there'll be ways in which we can charge for charging as we evolve. But in underserved communities and working class communities, free and accessible charging is really important. And I think it's important that our political leaders take the lead on that, because many times our citizens don't even know about charging or about EVs. And that's why ride-in drives that we do in Drive Electric Dayton is so important and across the state of Ohio. Because once people see an EV and they talk to you about it and they ride in one and get excited, then they think about purchasing one, and they're all connected.
Thank you. And I'm glad you went first, Rap, because I just want to, if you don't go out in the community, you don't hear stories like that. You'll never know those folks exist. You'll never know those things are happening. So that's why the community engagement aspect of all of this is so important. And some communities might not come out and say, we want EVs. That might not be where their mind is. They might say, we want more, we want less noise. We want less pollution. We want cleaner air. We want these things in our community. And you won't know those things either unless you're going out and engaging with folks. So thinking about where people's needs are, where electric vehicles can intersect with those needs, even if people aren't explicitly saying we need infrastructure for electric vehicles, and thinking about where those stories are, because those stories, the story that Rap just told, are what really, that along with the data, are how you make a very strong case to do this in neighborhoods and communities where folks might not see potential otherwise. So I think when you have those two things together, the community engagement, and you've taken a step back and really analyzed the data, you can make a strong case to do this work.
All right. And Josh, would you like to close us out?
I would just echo kind of this point that's already been made about community engagement, which is important for a whole host of reasons. Part of it, some of which is that folks access mobility in different ways. Not everybody needs their own charger for their own vehicle. Some folks rely on rideshare services, yellow cab companies, transit. And so the benefits of electrification are not just about owning your own vehicle. It's also about the overall cost savings. It's about the health, the air quality benefits. And so really ensuring that the solutions a community comes up with reflect or are trying to address the challenges that the community members have. The community engagement piece is so important. And Jacob, I don't know if you want to address this question now in the chat, because the community engagement piece kind of fits into that, or I can wait to address it.
Sure. If you want to take care of the question now, go ahead.
Sure. So this question from Gary is, what do you recommend for residents of a multi-unit dwelling to help their hopefully receptive property manager get started? And so this theme about community engagement translates well to a multifamily building, where a lot of times a typical multifamily building kind of will be a cross section of America, where you have some folks who are already well educated on EVs. They're already all the way bought in. You have a bunch of people who don't know, they might be curious. Then you have a bunch of folks who've heard a lot of problems and challenges, and how are we going to make sure that the electricity that I'm not, I don't drive an EV. I don't want to pay for the electricity. I don't want to pay for any, panel upgrades or anything. And so you have a whole range of questions. And so education and awareness is just a huge kind of initial threshold to get folks comfortable. Like, what are the options? Like, what would EV charging look like for our building? And so kind of to answer this question more directly, like, what do I recommend, or what would Switch recommend, the first step would be to reach out to multiple charging providers. Switch, our solution, as I mentioned in the intro, is really tailored towards the multi-tenant property setting. But and as much as I really believe in our product and solution, we're not the only company. And so, I'd encourage reaching out to a couple different providers, seeing what they would suggest. There's different approaches. But the good news is there are a lot of solutions that really work for the multi-tenant property setting. But if you only have a couple people who are kind of championing it, they're unlikely to gain traction. The outreach piece is really important, not just for education, but also to get some ownership and buy-in to doing it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for that. And moving on to our next section, I'll hand it over to Cassandra.
Awesome. Can you pull up my slides, or did you need me to pull them up, or?
Tried to.
Okay. While you're doing that, I'm going to send them over to everybody in the chat too, because you'll just be able to have them for later, save them. So we're going to talk a little bit about the EV Smart Communities program. So as I mentioned, my name is Cassandra Clevinger, and I'm the Deputy Director of Power Clean Future Ohio, and we work with local governments in Ohio. We have about 48 member communities at the moment. We work with them on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So we started in February of 2020. We started really heavily in the advocacy space, working with local governments to make that first goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we've evolved now to help them reach those goals and to provide programming and technical assistance to do that. So part of that technical assistance is the EV Smart Communities program. Great. Oh, perfect timing. That worked out so well. Okay. And that's a joint effort between Power Clean Future Ohio, the Electrification Coalition, Clean Fuels Ohio, and the Great Plains Institute, working to provide outreach to communities throughout the entire state of Ohio that they can join into this program and become an EV smart community and get technical assistance from all of these wonderful providers listed. Can you go to the next slide for me? So there's a lot of words on this because I just wanted you all to have the program information after today's presentation, but we're working with communities to think about electric vehicles and how electric vehicles can fit within their larger plans for electrification, for greenhouse gas emissions reduction, all of those things. It's entirely free to participate. There are some staff time commitments, about 1 to 3 hours a month, plus time to complete the action items. We really would like to see one person, one staff person committed to participation to complete the required onboarding materials. But we do realize with some of our smaller communities that council members and local officials pop in as staff people sometimes, so that we're also working with those folks as well. Any local government located in Michigan and Ohio can participate in this program. The partners I mentioned at the beginning are only working with the Ohio cohort. There are some partners in Michigan working with the Michigan folks, and Great Plains Institute is bringing us all together. The networking components are really awesome. They're optional pieces that you can choose webinars and other learning and networking opportunities to connect with communities across the state of Ohio, and also similar communities doing this work in the state of Michigan. We'll be providing resource guides, sharing funding opportunities. You'll have one-on-one staff time with our technical service providers, where our staff will meet with your staff to really dig deep on questions, to think about that data analysis piece that I mentioned earlier that's really crucial for cities that want to do this work, taking a step back and looking at your own fleet, looking at infrastructure opportunities, all of those things. And that peer community engagement too as well. So we'll be running this program from October 2023 to June of 2024. And at the end of this program, communities will walk away with 2 key deliverables, 2 key items that they'll be able to move forward with. They'll have a fleet analysis provided that provides very in-depth accounting for your electric vehicle fleet, where your mileage is, where your fuel costs are, all of the different pieces that you need to evaluate and make the case to your the elected officials that you work with, your finance departments, all the folks that work on budgeting, accounting, all of your program or your department heads, I should say, to justify making those purchases for EV, determining where it makes sense and maybe even what models to consider for certain end uses, all of those wonderful pieces. We'll also be providing roadmaps for folks that are really tailored to where you want to move forward as a community and where your goals are in pursuing EV readiness, being ready to move forward with EV infrastructure and all of those other pieces that you need. Really excited for both the cohort aspects of this program and the one-to-one tailored direct technical support that we're providing folks. Can you go to the next slide for me? So the version that you all have in the chat has a clickable link underneath where it says visit the PCFO website. So you can click on that, but it did not transfer over in PowerPoint. So you can also use the QR code from your form or from your phone. There's a form that you can complete once you go to that website if you're interested in participating in the program. It's very, very short and sweet just to get you onboarded and into our system. After you do that, we'll be reaching out to you to schedule a meeting to kind of give you a more in-depth overview to answer any specific questions you have about the program and to talk about next steps if you would like to participate. So I will stop there. You also all have some slides with a little bit more information about Power Clean Future Ohio and how to join if you'd like to become a Power Clean Future Ohio community and receive additional technical support in this area beyond October, and to also receive other really awesome technical support that we have available to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in your community. So I will stop there, and yeah, I'll pass it over to Jacob. I think you're muted still.
Yep. Thank
there
you.
You go.
So thank you for the introduction for everybody for the EV Smart program. I definitely agree. It is a great opportunity for communities. And in my totally unbiased opinion, we're putting together some wonderful resources for all of them to help make some of this transition as painless as possible. So now we can move on into the Q&A period. So we already have one from Gary, and this is for Cassandra. Do you offer a short message citizens can send to their local officials to explain the benefits of EV Smart and encourage them to participate?
Yes, I just posted it in the chat for you all. It's right on our website, and it also has that forms if they'd like to participate. So it's very short, but we'll be adding more resources once I have a copy of the webinar that goes on, that talks a little bit about the program and some other items. We'll have that ready for folks. We'll be adding them all to the website.
Awesome. Rap, did you have a question or?
I think it's very important when you deal with local elected officials, particularly when you're EV drivers, that you go to city council meetings and that you meet with your local elected officials and you offer to let them drive in your car. Because I think once people put their tails in a seat of an electric vehicle, they're excited about it. And what we've done in the Miami Valley is we've actually taken police chiefs and talked to them about the speed and safety of electric vehicles. So as an example, the city of Oakwood is going to buy this year their first electric Chevy Blazer police cruiser. And when I've talked to police departments about EVs, they tell me even the criminals are excited to sit in an electric vehicle. They have less issues, and citizens like to actually walk up to a cruiser and say, "What is that?" So we're not promoting crime or anything like that, but we think that the more local elected officials understand the benefits of EVs and they're driving them, and the administration is doing it, then the citizens are equally going to follow.
Awesome, thank you. And that's great to hear. Let's see. So I don't currently see another question in chat. Um, so I guess I do have one that I wanted to ask everybody. So when it comes to the federal funding opportunities that we had mentioned earlier, um, what have you all seen as best practices for local communities to, I guess, be able to benefit from those opportunities?
I'll just start with, there's a whole host of tax credits that are available because of IRA specifically. And you have like the personal electric vehicle tax credit where you can get up to $7,500 for a new vehicle, or for up to $4,000 for a used vehicle. That also exists in a commercial clean vehicle tax credit form, that's tax credit 30C, and or sorry, 45W, and tax credit 30C is the alternative fuel infrastructure. So if you're a city and you're looking to add EVs to your fleet and potentially also add charging stations, you can take advantage of both of these tax credits through something called direct or elective pay. And so that allows entities that don't necessarily have a federal tax burden, like cities, to still benefit from these tax credits. So you can get a certain amount of money back for buying these EVs or implementing these charging stations. And so that's kind of a little more wonky side of things, but the money is there. And so if you're looking at this, you should definitely go ahead and take advantage of it.
We're still seeing, we still haven't seen the first round of community fueling infrastructure grants get announced. So I think once we hear a little bit more about that program and who was awarded in that first round, we'll be able to speak more to that opportunity. I know the Electrification Coalition, we were just chatting about this a little bit earlier today, is working on. Once we know a little bit more about that, we'll have some more information for everybody. So very excited about that. But I think too, I'm really proud of Ohio and moving as fast as we are. There's upsides and downsides to it, and we could probably have a whole hour-long conversation on that. But breaking ground on some of the charging infrastructure in our state and being the leaders in that, I think is going to be beneficial for us too, and seeing that go in the ground, and we're starting to put steel in the ground in regards to that. So I'm again, we could probably debate the whole process as a whole for a while, but I think getting things moving there and being a leader in the country on that is going to be really awesome for Ohio.
And if I see Rap.
Yeah, I see Rap muted, but I can't unmute him.
I think it's also important that we reach out to the regional planning commissions throughout the state of Ohio. They have money that the federal government has allocated. A good example is the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission has allocated $1.5 million for level 2 charging throughout the greater Miami Valley. And one of the things they did was they actually went to literally every municipality with a map of the region, including Drive Electric Dayton, and said, what do you think is a good, where should a charger go? And that was really, really cool to see how that looked. A good example is people in Ohio would know that one of the greatest places that people can actually go and visitors visit is the United States Air Force Museum. And one of the problems there is they have 2 chargers for the entire museum. So it was really important that when we looked at our region and money that the Regional Planning Commission had, that we could put chargers in places that would bring jobs to the Miami Valley. And I think it's really important that we don't forget that one of the things that's happening for local elected officials and the state of Ohio is job creation, battery plants in our state, parts for EVs. So this really is a manifestation of health for our citizens, clean fueling, clean air, but also jobs and new jobs and created jobs for all Ohioans. And we really want to make that an important piece of this conversation.
And to piggyback a little on Cassandra's mention of the CFI grant, the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program, This is one of the two main EV charging focused programs in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And Ohio has the good distinction of being the first state in the country to actually break ground on its NEVI program, the National EV Infrastructure Public Fast Charging Program. But the CFI grant program, unlike NEVI, which flows to state departments of transportation, the CFI grant program is a competitive grant program administered by the Federal Department of Transportation. And its focus is just kind of generally speaking, a lot of its focus is to fill in gaps, whether along corridors or in communities. And for the purposes of this webinar, which is about community charging, and to your question, Jacob, like what sort of federal funding is relevant? I think the CFI grant program is really something that communities should be looking towards. It's a 5-year program. As Cassandra mentioned, the first round of applications is already under review, and the feds have not announced the winners yet. And I'm anticipating 3 more rounds of applications opening up over the next few years. But as a community member or an EV charging focused leader in your community, it's never too early to start those conversations around partnerships. For CFI grants, eligible applicants are states or local governments, metropolitan planning organizations, transportation authorities, and other similar types of entities. But the program allows partnership with private sector co-applicants. As Rat mentioned at the top, Justice 40 is a big focus of the current federal administration. There are companies out there like Charger Help that help bring in folks into the workforce and help train and provide good paying jobs for the ongoing maintenance of charging stations. So these partnership conversations, even if the funding round doesn't open for a while, it's never too early to start those.
Awesome. Thank you all for that. And as was said, the CFI announcements haven't been made yet on what was a successful procedure. But I know, we and Electrification Coalition and PCFO all worked with communities that were interested in going after those. And so I'll say right now, one of the things that I think is kind of the most promising direction is just talking to other communities in your area and around the state and building a coalition that can come together on one project proposal, because it is a federal funding opportunity. It is all 50 states, cities and similar communities in each of those states is going to be submitting an application. So if you and the 20 communities nearest you can all come together and say, these are our transportation needs across the region, this is how this opportunity can help us electrify most of, some or most of those needs, I think is really a promising direction for everybody to take that in. And I'll plug all 3 of our organizations. If you have any questions on that front, definitely feel free to reach out to any of us at any time, and we're happy to help support that. So that will wrap up our panel for this afternoon. So I'll let everybody do an outro, and I'll try to go in reverse order of the introduction. So let's start off with Rat.
I would like to invite all the folks who are listening to this event to join us at driveelectricdayton.com. We would encourage you, if you're excited about or even thinking about owning an AV, to participate in the ride and drive, because once you sit in one of our cars, you'll be excited. And then we would also encourage anyone out there that has successes with charging in your city to share it with others, because the evolution is occurring and this is something we're going to win at. So it's very important, and thank you for having us at Drive Electric Dayton.
Yeah, and then I believe next was Emily.
Yeah, so I would just like to continue to emphasize the importance of workplace charging in the community charging ecosystem. And I know there's a variety of workplace charging efforts and programs going on right now. But one we're working on is called Eval, and it's just recognizing the workplaces that are really leading the charge when it comes to charging. And so just check that out. They have some good information, and really just getting charging in the ground where we can. So thank you all for coming and listening today.
All right, and Josh, you're up next.
And so just as Emily focused on workplace, SWTCH's main focus is on multi-tenant, especially multifamily residential properties. And a key theme is that there's no one size fits all. There's no one type of charging that's needed. We're going to need charging whenever and wherever people can benefit from it. And so with multifamily charging, it is an underserved segment. As EV charging increases, we're seeing more and more really where these underserved segments are. And so the message is simply that there are, even though there are a lot of challenges and questions folks have around who's going to install it, who's going to pay for it, how we're going to manage the energy, all of those things, there are a lot of solutions out there specifically for the multifamily space. So don't let that stop you from getting started.
All right, and Cassandra.
Thank you all for inviting me to present today. And just, I guess my final words would be, don't be afraid to have the tough conversations, because those are progress in and of themselves. And moving forward on this in some communities can be a little bit challenging. But once you really start talking and figuring out where, I keep going back to these intersections, but where this lines up to other priorities in your community, it will start making more sense. So highly encourage you to reach out to us if you're interested in thinking about this more for your community and you feel like you'd be a good fit for the EV Smart Communities program, or you're working with a city that you feel like would be a good fit for that. Would love to hear more from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you, panelists, for sharing your wisdom with us. Hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks all.
Thanks.
Thank you all.